Welcome to the Nice Girls Wear Scrubs podcast. I'm Allie,
I'm Cindy.
and we are a mother-daughter nursing duo on a mission to change the nursing narrative and unsubscribe to the typical mean girls club. Scorpios by astrology and nurses by choice, we want to share stories, create community, and give you actionable items to love your nursing career again. So let's jump into the episode. Hey, Mom, have you heard that millennials and Gen Z nurses just don't want to work?
Actually, that's so crazy because I have heard a few people with that rhetoric that I've talked to that are also nurses, but I don't think I would agree that that's really the underlying problem, that they don't have this work ethic or that they don't really want to work. I don't know. What have you found?
I, oh God. Kaya tried to take the mic all the way down. So there we go. She didn't want it up here. I feel like with the younger population of people that I've worked with, it's the opposite. I feel like when they're passionate about something, they are very hard workers. They just don't want to do the traditional things that we were doing before. And so I think also with social media and with people talking about things and pay transparency and all of that, things that have become popular now, I think that a lot of us are very fed up. And I think a lot of these nurses went through COVID, which was a completely different type of nursing. And I just feel like it's not that they don't work, it's that they don't want to work for peanuts, for not good wages. You know, the cost of living has gone up a ton. And I mean, I've shared in my story, I don't know if I've shared it on here, but I got a new grad nurse job for 21, I think I made 21.18 was my starting wage, which I made more as a CNA in California. And I came to North Carolina and was expected to pay for all of these things, which obviously my job did not expect that of me, but like graduating from, two bachelor's degrees was like, oh, I should be making all this money. And I think it was a story that I had told myself too, or like this narrative that was shown and told to me basically on social media. And then now I feel like it's even worse for the nurses coming in. And this wasn't even the point of the podcast, but I think it's so glamorized that nurses have this like
Hmm.
lavish lifestyle. And that is the type of thing that was like really glamorized when I first started. So like nurses make such great money. And I think that is something that the general public doesn't understand as well, because I know a time I posted about, nurses don't make great money. I think all healthcare is encompassed in that as well. Healthcare workers don't
Yeah.
don't make very good wages. But I do feel like that with more and more discussion around pay and being able to live and not wanting to work multiple jobs. And so I
Yeah.
think just the idea that so many people were so used to either just picking up an extra job or, working overtime. It's just so common and prevalent in the field. And I think the nurses that are coming in now just don't want to do that. They want to work and they should be able to do that. They shouldn't have to work three jobs just to make ends meet. It's
Right.
not even like the lavish lifestyle of like working three jobs to live a lavish lifestyle. It's working three jobs to have what was called the American dream. And I just think a lot of nurses now value themselves as people, and it's
Mhm.
not that they don't want to work or they don't view it as a quote unquote calling, or they don't they aren't empathetic, or they don't want to be a nurse. They want to be a nurse, but it's very hard to be a nurse and be empathetic and do your job if you're also not being paid appropriately. And I think that
Right.
there's this stigma around nurses making good money, but then thinking that we're greedy and we don't want to do it for the patients, and that's just not true. I think
Right.
actually there was a hospital in California that I've heard like a lot of things about, and I didn't dig too much into it. I was going to do that before the podcast, but they gave $100,000 retention bonus
Hmm.
to their
Wow.
staff. And I think from after that, like their outcomes were better, they had better retention. And that just goes to show like when you value your workers, and that's not just pay, they will stay and they will work hard. And I think so many people who worked through COVID just felt like they weren't valued anymore. And I think it's something that we've talked about on the podcast a couple times is people just want to be valued, and whether that's monetary value or, feeling valued, and they don't want pizza parties anymore. They want
Right.
to feel valued and feel like a team and feel like they actually matter and aren't just a number.
Right. And the interesting thing you said about that, like, unfortunately or fortunately, I don't know where this lies, but the harsh reality is that if a company, a facility, a hospital, a clinic, whatever is making a large amount of money, and you don't see that money on your paycheck, you don't feel valued. So that company, them giving $100,000 speaks volumes for retention, because it's not just about the money, but it's what the money says. It says, we value you, we want you, we are going to give you part of our profits so that you will stay here. And I think that's huge. And if we take this back, like just one comment you said about you started at $21 an hour, and that was in 2014, 15, 2015. Yes. I started in nursing in 1984 and I made $12.64 an hour. That is literally more than half of what you made. So salaries over, how many years is that really quick? So
When did you
20,
start?
30 to 1984. So 2015. So that's like 30 years. I was
Yeah.
already a nurse 30 years by the time you came into it. And
Not
the
even $10
salaries,
an hour.
right?
$10 an hour in 30
Or
years.
in
There's
30
no
years.
way.
Yeah. So like think of the cost of houses in that 30 years. From 1984, your dad and I bought our first house in 1987, 87, 88, and it was $75,000.
Whereas now my house costs $299,000, and
And
that's in a lower cost of living area.
right.
And I
Yeah,
make
yeah,
not even, I mean,
yeah.
now I make a little bit more money,
Mhm.
but
Right. Yeah,
it's
exactly. So think of
crazy.
that. 300,000 versus 75,000, but your pay only went up $10 an hour. So I don't truly believe, even though I come from the era of work really hard, suck it up, just do more, work an extra shift. I come from that. That's what I was taught. And so I don't believe that that is really what we're experiencing here. I think that we've taught our girls, especially over the last 10, 20 years, to value themselves more. And unfortunately, in our society, when you work for somebody else, the value is money. That's how you, if somebody tells you you're going to pay you X amount, then that's what you feel like your value is. It is a whole paradigm. Like we pay uneducated workers minimum wage, right? The more, maybe you have more education, you make a little bit more money. We as a society have put a scale on that. And quite frankly, women driven professions tend to make less money. So I think it's more that millennials and Gen Zs are speaking out to all the things that we should have spoke out about 30 years ago. And while I don't find, like, just take you for example, you were a college athlete, like you worked probably the hardest of any kid I've ever seen in my life. You wanted to do double swimming before you actually ever should have. And then you did, like I talk to people like they say, oh, my kid doesn't get up, but you would get up at 4:30 in the morning and go to swim practice 3 times a week. And
And
then you
even
take your
during
Saturday. Yeah, right,
nursing school, I was like, I did a bikini competition. I worked out
right,
twice a day. Like I would go to
right.
clinical, I would wake
Yeah,
up, drive an
yeah.
hour, go to
Mhm.
the gym,
Yeah,
go to
yeah.
clinical, come home,
Mhm.
and probably work out again.
Again,
Not to
yeah,
mention I
yeah,
had 2 jobs during nursing school. And then
right.
in college, when
Yeah,
I was
yeah,
a college athlete, I
yeah.
was always teaching swimming lessons, or
Mhm.
I was
Mhm.
a lifeguarding. And so I
Yeah,
always had, and I had a job from 15 years old. I
right.
remember
And I
asking
do,
you
yeah,
to get
right.
my
Can I get a
lifeguard.
job?
Yeah, and I wanted to
Yeah,
get a
yeah,
job.
yeah. Yeah, so I don't know, I don't think that's it, but I do think you mentioned something that's so powerful is that COVID. And I know, I mean, I've been through a lot of different things. There was like a I don't even know if they called it a pandemic or whatever it was when we had the swine flu, but there were people being quarantined and we handled it a little bit differently. I mean, I worked through AIDS and that was also, pretty horrific to watch some of the things that we did as a society and as medical professionals. But, we learned through most of them. But COVID was handled so differently and it was impacted nationwide. People were afraid and people were overworked, like they wanted people to work more. New nurses, brand new nurses, saw more death than most of the nurses in their career in that short period of time. For whatever reason, this is not political or whatever. It's none of that. It's just facts of what happened during that time. So if you were in any kind of facility during COVID, you were worked really hard. I mean, let's just take one thing and put it in perspective. To work all day long in isolation gear, masks, goggles, that to me is so much harder than just doing regular nurses. And the amount of patients that we had coming in and out, and that you had to be in those rooms for that length of time. In the past, you'd get one patient that was an isolation patient, but there was some young nurses working that all their patients were isolation patients. I mean, fortunately for me, I was in the urgent care at that time, so it wasn't quite as impactful, but we would sick outside because we didn't want them inside, outside a drive-through COVID testing center with rain, and it took them literally 6 to 8 months to get us like we had a little container that we could stand in. And when we started doing it, we didn't have anything. You'd be out there in the rain, you'd be out there with your papers blowing all over. And so factor all that in to make, not very good wages. I don't really truly, I'm not going to believe that it's that they don't want to work. I
And then I
truly
think
believe.
people so we were heroes and then we went from being
Right.
heroes
Yeah.
to
Zero.
nothing. And
Yeah.
it was like everybody put us on a pedestal and they claimed that they were going to give us these bonuses and all this
Yeah.
stuff. And then I know even the last job I had, our hours were really micromanaged because
Mhm.
of how much money we lost, the hospital
In the
lost
beginning.
during
Yeah.
COVID.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that just makes you feel as a worker who worked through all of that and gave your time and
Mhm.
really just worked really hard, and for them to, as a hospital system or company, as your
Mhm.
company, come back and basically say, well, none of that really matters. Now we're
Right.
trying to, scrimp and scrounge as best as we can. In addition, I think new nurses who were kind of thrown to the wolves when they
Mhm.
started, and they didn't get good orientations. Newer nurses were orienting newer nurses. And I think none of those nurses who went through nursing school at that time even got to step foot in a hospital during COVID. So then they were coming out and they'd never seen
Mm.
patients. And then
Right.
to start with that, in addition to having the rules change all the time. So policies and procedures were changing daily. And I think it's something
Right.
that in itself too is very confusing for people, and was
Mhm.
just had a lot of burden on us as staff, that you know one day you would do something this way and then the next, and coming from places where there was always the same way all the time, and having policies and
Right.
protocols and everything that never changed unless there was some sort of reason to. Having those change almost daily or every other day, I think is very
Mhm.
stressful. And so I think just having that
Mm.
stress too,
Yeah.
I think a lot of these nurses are very burnt out. And I can kind of parallel to my nursing journey. And it's I did it to myself because I got offered to do 1.0 as a new grad, which I think I'd hit my 6 months, and they're like, we need more staff. Would you be
Mhm.
willing to do 1.0, which most nurses are called zero point 0.9 FTE,
Yeah.
and they work 3 shifts a week. Well, 1.0 is 3 shifts one week, 4 shifts the next. And
Mhm. Yeah.
I think I did that for about a year, and I would even pick up to almost do 5 shifts a week some weeks,
Mhm.
which I had reasons and goals to do that. But when you work that hard, which it was probably the equivalent of people working the 3 days during COVID, if not harder for the 3 days during COVID, you become severely burnt out and jaded much
Yeah.
quicker than people who worked a long time ago. And I think we don't talk enough about mental health
Mhm.
of our people who are taking care of people
Of
as
other
well.
people.
And I
Mhm.
think that it's stigmatized still. And there's either a train of thought of like, oh, everybody in healthcare is just on, medication,
Mhm.
or we just don't talk about it.
Right.
So there's
100%.
two. And I know,
Yeah.
like, just being on social media, there's people who have said, like, their preceptors told them to get on, some sort of medication. And, I know when I was traveling, a lot of people on the unit I was traveling on were on medication as well. And I
Mm.
thought, like, I'm so depressed and anxious. Like, do I need that?
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think now so many nurses are realizing that if you want to work for 40 years, you gotta be able to get through the 40 years. You can't
Yeah.
be like burnt out, tired, have horrible mental health, not take care of yourself.
Right.
And I think just before even I started, like, nurses were always notorious for not taking care of themselves.
Nope.
And I think now we're a little smarter, we've been given that permission,
Aware,
yes,
maybe
and more
aware.
aware, not smart,
Yeah.
but, like, we now
Well,
know that we
yeah.
can take care of ourselves, and that means setting boundaries, that means finding our value, and that means,
Mhm.
like, actually asking for things. And I think, um, it just makes it hard as a profession, um, for the old school of thought to kind
Yes.
of transition to the new school of thought, and maybe it's that seen as not
Lazy.
wanting to work hard or
Yep.
lazy because they wanna
Mhm.
take care of themselves. But I think the best people to take care of patients are the ones who are taking care of themselves. And I know
Mhm.
for myself, I'm less anxious, I'm more attentive, I, pay more attention to detail, I'm happier, I can even just say from, like, my transition from my last job to this job, I'm more pleasant, I'm, better in my relationships, I show up to work.
Yep.
Before I would dread getting up, and I would wake up in the morning and be so unproductive and get up and be like, "Oh, I don't want to go to work." And then someone who was never late, I was almost
Started
late a
becoming
lot of
late.
times.
Yep.
And that was kind of my big sign of like, "Ooh, there's something wrong. Like, I shouldn't be feeling like this," because I hadn't been feeling like that before. And I know now, like, it's easy for me to get up. Like, obviously it's a little bit easier because now I work from home, but, like, when I was working in the office, I would, like, get up, go to the gym, and then after work, I would, like, come home and walk my dogs. And I just feel like I'm such a better person at work and outside of work,
Mhm.
when I'm doing a job that I, like, feel valued and, feel good, and when I take care of myself as well. And I think
Right.
a lot of
Yeah.
the newer nurses are kinda catching on to that too.
And I think that you mentioned something that was super key is that you talked about taking care of yourself, but we were taught, I'm on the edge of baby boomers, like my mom's a baby boomer as well. And so I'm like on the edge, and then there's Gen X. And even Gen X, I think, was taught this because they just got mentored by us or people older, is that like there was nobody taking care of us. There's nobody, like there would be shifts that I would work 14 hours and never go to the bathroom. Now, I mean, obviously I come from a different background as well, so that's complicated on top of, the nursing profession, not like wearing, like it's more a badge of honor to be able to do that. I remember one skills lab, we used the bladder scanner, and they were like boasting about how full your bladder could be or how much it could hold because you had trained yourself, to hold it like an entire shift. That's like so bad for your body too, and then what happens on that, if you have to hold it all shift, then you don't drink water. And so you go 12 hours not drinking anything.
And then you end
And
up getting a kidney infection or a bladder
right.
infection or a
Yeah.
UTI, and then you're
Yeah.
out of work. So the
Right.
thing
And
is,
yeah.
if you
Yeah.
want your employees to
Right.
be there and
Right.
present,
Yeah.
then I think it's just
Yep.
so important to take care
Mhm.
of yourself
Right.
and to
Yeah.
promote taking care of your
Yes.
employees.
Yeah. And then have the resources to be like, why I only thought of this recently, and I think it was something you said. You're like, I am not going to be like, not go to the bathroom. And I had like places I worked where that was like, you were docked if you went to the bathroom. Well, What if you have to go to the bathroom? Like, there should be somebody to say, hey, can you watch my patients? I'm running to the bathroom really quickly. That shouldn't be a, like, I'm going to write you up, like it shouldn't be like that. And then the other thing I was thinking as you were talking is like your mental health too. Like that's more your physical, but your mental health as well. Like we see death. I've seen kids die. I've had to tell moms that we didn't save their 12-year-old. I have had to call a wife that she didn't even know her husband was in the ER, and I had to call her and tell her that he passed away. Like those things take a toll on you as a person, let alone as a nurse. And when I started going to therapy, my therapist was like, well, who do you talk to about those things? And I said, we don't. We just move on. And like I've seen horrific things in the ER to patients, to people, to family members, all kinds of stuff. And there's nobody taking care of our nurses. And in social work, they actually have networks when you go to school that teaches you how to take care of yourself.
Mm.
And not that we're social workers, but think about it. We see people at their most vulnerable times. We listen to the things they say. They don't just talk about what's happening to them right there. They talk about all the things that happens to them in their life. And if we're not watching what happens to our caregivers, whether it's a nurse's aide, a medical assistant, whoever it is, if we're not watching them and making sure that they're taken care of, or that they don't just carry all that along in their life, they're going to burn out. They're going to have struggles. They're going to be not productive workers either. And now we have this whole mentality of like, well, they just don't want to work, like, wow, I just think they're lazy. It's a whole generation. They're just all lazy. Well, I just can't believe that, because I think for the first time ever, they're actually awake and they want the best for not just themselves, but for everybody.
And I think that doesn't, you wanting to take care of yourself and you wanting to be financially secure and mentally prepared, that to me speaks volumes that you actually care about your patients more than the people who say nursing is a calling, you shouldn't be in it for the money.
Right.
Because if you are, and it's something that I'm super excited about. I was asked to speak at a nursing school to, I think they're higher up, either educators or something. And I am just so excited because if there was even like a small amount of financial education coming, or even like if your manager cared in your hospital system all the way trickle down,
Right.
they cared about your financial well-being, which is very tied to your emotional and mental well-being, how much more productive would you be?
Would you be right? 100%.
Because if you don't feel financially secure, confident, and you're worrying about all this stuff while you're at work, and we're told to just put it aside, most people can't do that. They can't just stop thinking about how they're not going to be able to pay for food, how they can't pay for daycare, how they, may lose their house. And I think if we offer that service to nurses, and that's why I'm so passionate about educating nurses financially, and and making them feel so confident and so secure. But I feel like there's a reason why corporations as a whole don't talk about financial literacy, because at the end of the day, the more financially secure that your employees are, the less tied they are to that company.
Yep.
And that's what people call, the FU money and the being so. But I think if we actually care about the wellness of our nurses and our medical professionals, there would be financial education and financial help for them, which would include adequate wages for what they're doing. And I just think it's so important.
it is kind of interesting. Like I have heard so many times that, oh, they just went into nursing for the money. And I don't care what anybody says. I just truly cannot believe that anybody goes into nursing for the money. Yes, some people may look at it that I can make a good salary. I can make a good salary. Nobody goes into nursing and said, man, damn, I'm going to get rich on this. I don't know anybody that thinks that. People that go into nursing, maybe they think things like this. It will be a stable career.
Mm.
I will make good money. Nobody ever says they'll make great money. And when rough times come, typically nurses don't worry about having a job. So there's some stability in that. But if you got into this for the money, I mean, maybe you
You're
will
never
be
going to be
super
a
disgruntled.
millionaire
No.
as a nurse. And I take that back. You
Well,
can
you
be
could
a
save to be a
millionaire
millionaire. Yeah.
and invest your money,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
by the time you're retired, or if you take your money and you invest it into real estate, those type of
Yeah.
things. If you use
Yeah.
it as a tool, that's fine.
Yeah.
But I even think those people, there's still a cap on what you make. So
Right.
it's still not going to make you rich. And I don't
Right.
think that people and people that want to just do real estate anyways are going to leave the profession anyways. They're not
Right.
going into
Yeah.
it because they want to be rich. And
Yeah.
I just think
Correct.
that nurses need to at least make a comfortable salary to where
Mhm.
they are not stressed out about working 3 jobs in order to pay
Right.
their bills back. And I mean, we talked about this on the phone too. My nursing school, why I chose it, it was because it was pretty cheap. It was one of the
Yeah.
most affordable bachelor's programs because I thought I wanted to go back to school anyways, and I didn't want to do like an associate's, then have to do a bachelor's, and then have to do a master's.
Right.
So I chose that program. But I mean, some of the other programs I was looking at, I think there was like
$1,000.
yeah, like I think St. Mary's, that was an ABSN, $100,000. A couple of the ABSNs in the area I live, about the same amount of money. And it's like, I was just even thinking, like, I thought about how much I make as a clinical instructor and how much they charge for school. And I'm like, wow.
Where does the money go?
And like, I do say like they do put in a lot of money to like the sim lab, and like they have like one of the best
Yeah.
like all of that is really, really cool. But it's just so interesting to me because it's like a smaller scale of like a hospital of like all this money that we pay to like go to school, and like where does it actually go?
True.
And it's funny. And then it's like you pay $100,000 to go to school, but you start out making 32
Right.
dollars an hour,
It
which
doesn't
is
equate.
maybe $70,000
Yeah.
ish.
A year.
So how are
Yeah.
you going to be able to afford to pay that back?
Right. That's the problem. Is
And
that,
then
and
you
then when
have the
I
burden of like being stressed about your student loans and how am I going to pay them back? And
yeah.
then after your student loans come, you're like trying to find housing. And then now, like the area that I live, housing is super unaffordable. Like
Right.
when
Yeah.
before I bought my house, my rent had gone up to $2,200 a month.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and inflation and everything is hurting a lot of people, but you know, I just truly believe that there needs to be some research and see what is an affordable wage, what is their education level, what is their responsibility, what is their risk. Like nurses run the risk of, you know, uh, with their patients, but they also run the risk of themselves, incurring some harm as well. So there's a whole gamut of stuff, and that's probably for another podcast. But I truly believe that if we're going to bridge this gap between baby boomers, which we're going to all age out soon enough, but we need to change the narrative because we've passed it down so much that, let's meet everybody where they are and make them the best nurse possible, but don't discount the fact that just because they want more money and have a livable wage, that they don't want to work.
Our mission with this podcast is to create a community of nurses who want to change the field from the inside out. If this podcast resonated with you, make sure you like and subscribe wherever you are listening to this podcast. It helps you stay up to date with future podcast episodes, and it also makes sure we create a large community of nurses who want to change the field.